Hello again, this is John from AF Anime, and today I'm going to be discussing One Piece chapter 1029, which is titled The Tower. And although this chapter starts off relatively slow, we do reach the conclusion of at least one fight. And although that fight was by no means intense, it did have a lot of narrative purpose, and we actually get a chance to see one member of the worst generation get his comeuppance. Now, that doesn't happen until the end of the story, so I'll get to the review and then we will discuss that when the time comes. Now, first things first, we are still doing the request cover pages, and this one is of Jewelry Bonnie eating some soba noodles with a bunch of otters. And for me, this is one of those meh cover pages, but for the most part, it is nice to see Jewelry Bonnie considering all the stuff that's going on with the other members of the worst generation here in Wano. Now, I wouldn't go as far as to give a rating to cover pages, but this one's not horrible, just not really good either. Alright, now getting on with the chapter, we are going to talk about that slow start that I spoke of earlier, and that's in regards to Sanji and his fight. Now, the first few pages of this chapter are very dialogue heavy, and it would seem that Sanji is backsliding a little bit when it comes to his productiveness during this raid. And this would be because of the recent development of his body becoming more like that of his siblings. And when Queen makes note of this, that he heard from Judge all of the side effects and the benefits, quote unquote, he caps off that list by mentioning that Judge stated that they also grow hearts of ice. And it is this heart of ice mention that sends Sanji into a little bit of reflection on thinking about how he doesn't want to be like his siblings. Now, this causes him to run away from the fight and claim that he needs some time to think. And as he is fleeing, some of the beast pirates shoot off some guns and they have no effect on Sanji. And it is then that Queen demands to see the raid suit and fires off a crap ton of lasers at Sanji, and there's a great explosion, but we don't see the effect of the attack. And this is because we immediately go to the second floor where we see the fight between Big Mom, Kid, and Law. Or I suppose I should say that the fight actually is between Law and Big Mom because Kid is actually down and out. Hawkins is doing an amazing job of keeping him injured and distracted. But our boy Law does seem to be holding his own. He even lands a counter shock on Big Mom before he's hit with a projectile fire move called Stolen Fire. And if you did not get the mythological reference that was given there, Prometheus is named after a Greek deity who managed to steal fire and gift it to the humans. In any case, the move connects with Law, and we see Big Mom do an amazingly acrobatic move where she jumps and flips into the air and then comes down with a strike using Napoleon. And this acrobatic move has the name of Mama Raid, which is supposed to sound like marmalade. And even though the move seems to have some effectiveness, it doesn't actually manage to take out Kid or Law. And we then move on to the next page where we see that the head damage that Kid has been taking on is actually due to Hawkins banging his head up against the wall. Now, this fight is taking place on the third floor, and with this fight in particular, I think Oda does a really good job of making us not like Hawkins. Not only one is he hampering Big Mom's defeat by injuring Kid, even though Killer is not even fighting back at this point. And then Hawkins has the audacity to mock Killer's laugh and the fact that he consumed a Smile Devil fruit. And then he starts talking crap about Kid's ambition to supplant one of the emperors, and even going as far as to kick Killer while he's down. And then it's here that we actually get a little bit of dialogue showing the hopelessness that Basil Hawkins feels when it comes to scaling himself against Big Mom and Kaido. And if you really pay attention to his facial expressions, you can kind of see the annoyance he has with the whole situation. Not necessarily that he's annoyed with Kid and his pirates, but more so that he seems to be annoyed with himself. Now, Killer does pick up on this apprehension, and he seizes it by mocking Basil Hawkins a little bit about him not standing up for himself, saying that Hawkins is just angry that Kid and Killer are still there despite the insurmountable odds, while Basil Hawkins just pissed himself and submitted. And that seemed to really kind of get into Basil Hawkins' head a little bit as we see him reflecting a bit on his choices before he decides to try to finish off Killer. But Killer actually responds by intelligently cutting off his left arm. And this is a way to set up Basil Hawkins' defeat without him actually needing to hurt his own captain to do so. And this is because Kid no longer has a left arm. And also, by some stroke of luck, Kid's doll, which represents his damage, is conveniently on Hawkins' left arm. Now, Hawkins says that that was his last life. We have no way of knowing that's true. Then Hawkins proceeds to draw the Straw Man's card, or the Annihilation card, to which Killer swiftly decapitates. And even though Hawkins is generally confident about the end of this battle, he still draws a card anyway to see how the battle will conclude. And it is there that we get the namesake of the chapter when he draws the tower card. And then we see Basil Hawkins freeze up in a cold sweat, as the tower card signifies great change. Its hidden meaning indicates the opening of a new path or the upheaval of an established order. And even though he should clearly see Killer coming in for a finishing blow, it appears that Hawkins doesn't actually fight back whatsoever. He accepts the fate of the cards. Now, up until this point, this fight between these two members of the Worst Generation hasn't really been that exciting. However, I can't help but feel that once this is animated into the anime, it will look amazing and it will have an amazing feel to the changing of the tides in the rebellion. So in any case, it's unclear whether or not Hawkins is actually dead. I think this is One Piece, so more than likely he's alive. And even though he was cut straight up the middle by Killer, it wouldn't be surprised to see him on his feet within the next 10 or so chapters, or possibly even coming in for a last minute save for Kid and Law. I mean, that's just speculation for now, but I'll get on so I can finish up the chapter. In any case, after we see that Hawkins is down and out, we go back to the Big Mom, Kid, and Law fight, and we see a nastily sinister look on Kid's face. And even though the shading in this panel really isn't that on point, I have to say that this panel might be my favorite amongst the chapter. But immediately after that, we see that the final panel is a panel of Killer saying, "Go for it, partner." And in my opinion, that is one of the best endings to a chapter in quite some time. Alright, now on to the ratings portion of the video, and as always, we start with the artwork, in which case for this week, I'm giving this chapter an 8. Ultimately, it wasn't a super amazing chapter in terms of artwork. There were some perspective issues where some of the zoomed out panels were kind of blurry, 2 panels in particular where it was hard to make out any detail on Basil Hawkins' face. However, it still was an impressive chapter in regards of artwork. I mean, the panel where Killer is cutting up his final attack on Hawkins, that was just amazing. And also there was the fight between Kid, Law, and Big Mom. I mean, ultimately there was some beautiful panels in that, especially with the fire attack that Law took. And as I said before, it was an amazing chapter, just not really awesome or breathtaking in terms of its beauty or its detailed artwork. And next, we're going to move on to the story for this week's chapter, and I'm going to be giving the story a 9. Now, I'll admit, at the beginning, I was kind of annoyed and just waiting for this situation to end with the whole Sanji running away thing, because to me, it just felt like a cop-out for Oda to stretch out the defeat of Queen and King, so that way he can, flex his narrative muscles on some other situations and other characters. But I will say this interaction between Kid and Hawkins really kind of made up for that for me. I mean, the range of emotions and the range of loyalty you get to see from a Worst Generation member like Killer. I mean, he lays down his life to save his captain. And then on top of that, you see Hawkins kind of just pushing his buttons, but also you get to see the narrative change of heart that he has right before he's cut down. I mean, this is just great storytelling on Oda's part, and there's really no comedy required at all in the situation. Now, I'm sure that the whole Sanji thing is going to have some narrative relevance in the future. I mean, I'm assuming that Sanji is going to have some kind of character growth to accept the risk of, losing his quote-unquote emotions for the sake of helping out the Pirate King. But it just seems like the trope that Oda keeps pushing on the fan base, or at least Sanji's fan base, of him taking one step forward and then another step back, seems to continue into the end stretch of Wano. And so if it weren't for the whole Sanji situation, I would have definitely been given the story in this chapter a 10. However, 9 will have to do for now. And finally, moving on to the hype of this chapter, I'm going to go ahead and give that an 8. Now, in terms of hype, we don't really get a whole lot of edge of your seat moments, nor do we really get any long-term focus on any epic fights. But we do get to see a handful of amazing named attacks. We get to see Big Mom flipping through the air like some kind of acrobatic ninja. But ultimately, those type of things don't really warrant a high hype rating. The reason why I'm giving it an 8 instead of anything lower is just strictly because of the end. The end of the chapter does an amazing job hyping us up, or at least hyping me up, to see the next chapter. And I'm really hoping they stick with the Kid, Law, and Big Mom fight just to kind of carry that hype and that emotion into the next chapter. So in terms of hype, a great chapter, just not perfect in my opinion. So now that we have the art, the story, and the hype out of the way, that gives us an average rating for this chapter as being 8.3. I mean, I wouldn't by any means call it a top 10 chapter of Wano, but still very impressive. Alright, and now it is time for the discussion portion of this video where I go over some things that I want to talk about or I just want to address. Now, the first thing I want to talk about is the depth to which Hawkins was defeated. Obviously, I don't believe he's dead, but I would like to see that maybe him seeing that card realized that joining the members of his fellow generation, or even just standing up for your own morals rather than cowering behind the cards, could be a more viable option than just bowing to Kaido. I mean, if I gave my honest opinion, I would say that Scratchman Apu is most likely going to turn against the Beast Pirates anyway. I mean, Queen did kind of screw him over and put him directly in harm's way. So I think it would be incredibly poetic, or just epic as can be, if Killer actually hung around to wait for Hawkins to wake up and then get his official joining to the rebellion's cause. And then for the two of them to show up to the fight with Big Mom and Kid and Law. And if the four of them all work together on defeating Big Mom, I would be the fulfillment of that original alliance that they tried to work on. Or heck, even 5 if somehow Scratchman Apu gets involved in the situation. And the next thing I want to talk about would be Sanji. Now, ultimately, I know that he is big about his emotions, or at least big about the concept of not being similar to his unfeeling siblings. But ultimately, he was different from them in the initial outset. So I wouldn't assume right away that his emotions would just fall away. Not to mention the narrative potential that Sanji has to garner some laughs or to keep the situation light. I don't think Oda would just throw that away. So given that myself and most fans assume that Oda isn't just going to do away with Sanji's emotions, it seems like a red herring, or at least a way to stretch out the fight between him and Queen rather than just having him fight Queen full on to get it done and over with. So I personally hope that we don't just get wasteful panels in the future for the next couple chapters of Sanji running away from Queen and thinking to himself. Because if that is the path that Oda's going to take here, to not, have Queen be defeated quite yet, then I would just hope that he just not check into the fight rather than giving us this whole Sanji backstepping BS. So let's hope that that doesn't happen. But to go back to the whole Big Mom situation, I would have to say that the way this chapter was ended, this was actually the first time that I felt that it was entirely possible for Kid and Law to defeat Big Mom. And I would say that that would have to do with Oda's emotional command of the storytelling toward the end of the arc, because we haven't actually seen anything from those two that indicate that they were capable of beating Big Mom without Luffy's help, much less with it. But I have to say that Hawkins drawing that card does make me feel like the tide is truly about to start turning for the greater at this portion. So that'll conclude my discussion portion of the video and the video as a whole. Thankfully, there is no chapter break next week from what I can tell, so I'm very excited to see which route Oda decides to take into progressing this raid, since it does kind of feel like it is starting to bigger fights between Kaido, Big Mom, and their opponents, since a lot of these small fries have been done and dealt with. Anyways, that is going to do it for this video. If you guys had anything that you wanted to discuss or anything that I might have missed, please let me know in the comments section down below. Also, if you've enjoyed this content, please like, share, and subscribe. I would absolutely appreciate that. This has been John from AF Anime, and I will catch you guys in the next video.